guys, I'm Joan.
And I'm Joanita.
And we are students of Ghana Christian International High School. And we urge you all to subscribe to His God TV.
Hello guys, so welcome to His God TV. Before I begin with today's discussion, I would like to remind you to subscribe to the channel in case you have not done so. And if you have also subscribed, we thank you very much for your support to the channel. This is a channel dedicated to the teaching of history, CRS, government, social studies, English language for the SHS senior high school students. And so if you are interested, you kindly subscribe for more video. So today we are looking at the 1954 Constitution. The 1954 Constitution, also known as the Dr. Kwame Nkrumah Constitution or the Nkrumah Constitution, mainly because it was a constitution that was introduced by Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah in 1954. And that is why we term the 1954 Constitution as the Nkrumah Constitution. In our previous lesson, we discussed about the outcome of the 1951 election, and we said that the 1951 election was the first of its kind to be held in the country or in the Gold Coast at that time, and that was the first ever election conducted by the British for the Gold Coasters. And the outcome was that after the election, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of the Convention's People's Party came out victorious by winning 34 seats out of 38, whilst the first political party that was founded in the Gold Coast, the UGCC, won only 3 seats, and the last seat went to the independent candidate. And so that made Dr. Kwame Nkrumah the leader of government business. So he became the leader of government business and was in charge of the country to a certain extent. Now, after Nkrumah, so that is a continuation of this topic. And in case you did not watch that video, I would also include the link in the description so that you can go and watch in there. Again, you may also need to know some of the you may also need to know something about the 1951 Constitution, the Aiden Clark or the Coussey Constitution. You may also need to know something about it before you can also be able to clearly understand the issues that are going to be raised in the 1954 Constitution. So I would also include the link of the Coussey Constitution as well in the description so that you can also check and then abreast yourself with the information over there, because that's what we are going to use to discuss and compare it with the 1954 Constitution. Good. So let's begin with the objectives. So our lesson objectives for today is quite simple. That by the end of this lesson, we should be able to examine the features or the strength of the 1954 Constitution. So as we have done for all the constitutions that we have learned about. By the way, we have learned about the 1916 Constitution, the Clifford Constitution. We have learned about the 1925 Constitution, the Gettysburg Constitution. We've also learned about the 1946 Constitution, that's the Alan Barnes Constitution. Then we've also learned about the 1951 Constitution, that is the Coussey Constitution. And today we are learning about the 1954 Constitution. Therefore, we know how the constitutional development had taken place in the Gold Coast right from 1916 up till date. And so I have all these lessons on the page. You can kindly go through the playlist and then check it for yourself. So we will look at the features, what was new about the 1954 Constitution. Then we also look at the shortcomings, as we do every day. So the shortcomings, what were the weaknesses in the 1954 Constitution? And so these two objectives should guide us in our conversations today. So let's introduce ourselves to the 1954 Constitution. So you'll recall that in 1951, a new constitution was drawn for the Gold Coast, known as the Coussey Constitution. And this constitution came up as a result of the findings of the Watson Commission, which recommended that a new constitution be drafted for the Gold Coast. And so that new constitution was drafted. Again, we also said that the 39-member committee, which was set up by Gerard Coussey, the governor, the British governor at that time, to draft the constitution, out of that 39, Kwame Nkrumah was excluded from that 39, even though 5 members of the UGCC who were arrested together with Dr. Kwame Nkrumah after the 1948 rout were included in that committee. But Nkrumah was not part, and I said that there was no reason was given for Nkrumah's exclusion from that from that committee. So then, when Nkrumah won, because that constitution provided that an election should take place, so election did, and then in 1951, Nkrumah, who was then in prison, won the election, even though he was in prison, and then later he was released. So when he was released to take office or to take power, he described the 1951 Coussey Constitution as an imperialist fraud. Imperialist fraud. He described that constitution as a fraud. And like I told you the last time, these were some of the reasons why he was not actually involved in that constitution, because I said that he would not have agreed to the terms in that constitution, because that constitution did not give total independence, not even total independence. It wasn't, some of the clauses in there were not standard principles of governance. Okay, and so Nkrumah described that as imperialist fraud. And then he decided to adopt a new constitution that was more satisfactory, that was based on the principles of governance. Okay, and that constitution was the 1954 Constitution, known as Dr. Kwame Nkrumah Constitution. So we are going to look at the features of that constitution, as well as its strength and its weaknesses. So let's begin with the features. What was new in this 1954 Constitution? Now, in that constitution, bear in mind that the Legislative Assembly had been replaced. The Legislative Council had been replaced with the Legislative Assembly. So in the 1951 Constitution, the Legislative Council, which we had seen in Gettysburg Constitution, in Alan Barnes and Clifford Constitution, in 1951, the council, the Legislative Council, was now known as the Legislative Assembly. So in that Constitution, we saw that the Legislative Assembly, the seats in that assembly were 84. However, in Nkrumah's Constitution in 1954, he increased the number of seats, okay, in the Legislative Assembly from 84, which was in the 1951 Constitution, to 104, okay, in Nkrumah's Constitution. So in Nkrumah's Constitution, the Legislative Assembly had 104 seats, okay, and they also had a speaker, 104 seats with a speaker, instead of the governor, of course, presiding as enshrined in the 1951 Constitution. So in Nkrumah's 1954 Constitution, the Legislative Assembly was supposed to have 104 seats and a speaker. However, in the 1951, it was supposed to be 84 seats, and then the governor will preside over the assembly. So you see that Nkrumah has drafted the way a little. He has changed, or he has replaced the governor, okay, the governor in the 1951 Constitution, to a speaker, okay, in the 1954 Constitution. All right, and then also increase the number of seats. Now, what does the increase of the number of seats meant? It simply meant that Nkrumah created or redemarcated more constituencies. So more and more people were represented in the Legislative Assembly. All right, more and more people were represented, and it was based on population basis. So more constituencies were created, and this was a good thing, because at least the governor would be the the governor cannot or could not influence the work of the Legislative Assembly, because the Legislative Assembly, according to the principles of governance, is supposed to be independent. But then if you have the governor being a chair, I think the governor was still going to influence the workings of the assembly, and therefore a speaker who was going to be neutral to issues in there was appointed by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Again, there was the removal of the ex-officio members from the Executive Council, and by this, there was a total Africanization of the Executive Council, so making all the 8 members who will be appointed by the Prime Minister from the Legislative Assembly. Now, the Executive Council, the composition of the Executive Council, all right, in the 1951 Coussey Constitution, had in there 3 ex-officio members who were all supposed to be white, and the Executive Council was the highest of the councils. Now, Nkrumah felt that there was no need for white people to still be in the Executive Council. Okay, now 3 whites were supposed to be in the Executive Council according to the 1951 Constitution. Then 6 were also to represent mining, defense, and other things. And then 37 or so were chosen by the chiefs. And so those were the 1951 Constitution. Now, Nkrumah felt that there was supposed to be a total Africanization. Africans should take matters into their hand and then be a majority, even though, yes, they were a majority, but he took away the ex-officio members from the Executive Council. So the ex-officio members in the 1951 Constitution, we are saying, was taken away by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, making all the 8 members Ghanaians. So for the first time in the history of the Gold Coast, we have had a constitution whereby all the members on the Executive Council, the highest body in governance, were Ghanaians. All right, and that is one of the one of the good things about this constitution. Again, the constitution also provided an entire election for 104 seats. So the 104 seats which Nkrumah had brought about over here, 104 seats, all of them were to be elected through direct vote. So people were to vote for all these 104 seats. Now, the Constitution then adopted the universal adult suffrage, which means every adult who had attained a voting age could vote. Remember, in the 1925 Constitution, Couchesburg introduced some sort of elective principle, which was limited to property franchise. But then Nkrumah adopted a universal adult suffrage for elections to the Legislative Assembly. Now, when this happens, it means that all the chiefs were going to be kicked out from the Legislative Assembly. If you recall, in the 1951 election, the 1951 Coussey Constitution, we learned that out of the 84 members that were supposed to be in the Legislative Assembly, 37 of these members were supposed to be chosen by the chiefs, whereas 38 were to be elected. Okay, and so the role of the chiefs was still maintained by the British, and we shouldn't blame Nkrumah for taking out the role of the chiefs, because the British had their own intentions of why they may want to maintain the chiefs, all right, on the Constitution. Nkrumah felt that the chiefs giving that power to appoint people into the Legislative Council was undemocratic, because if you can't appoint people to represent others, and so the people must choose for themselves who they want to represent. And hey, I don't think that this was a bad thing that Nkrumah did, because in the principles of governance, that is what it is. But because the British had their own inward motives, they kept the chiefs in the Constitution, in there. And so when Nkrumah had come with this new idea, it generated hatred among the chiefs towards Nkrumah, because they felt that you have come to take us away, and then, even while the white man kept us in there. But really, if we are to look at principles of governance, what the British were doing were not in line with the principles of governance. And so, but, well, that's just by the way. So that is how come the chiefs were taken out from politics. And so today we don't see the chiefs eventually in politics, playing any active role in our policy, in our politics. It was the 1954 Constitution that began this thing. And you see, this also resolved the whole conflict between the educated elite and the chiefs. Remember that the educated elite and the chiefs were fighting over who should lead the people. As Coussey Hayford said, by their education, they were supposed to lead the people. And the chiefs were also saying that they are the true representative of the people. And so that educated elite and the chiefs, fighting over who to represent the people was solved with this. And with this came, of course, hatred for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. But I don't blame him. I don't blame him. And I don't even understand why even then the committee, of course, the 39-member committee even accepted the 1951 Constitution when they knew that this Constitution is unconstitutional or undemocratic, Good. So let's go on with the features of the 1954 Constitution. The governor, again, the colonial governor, still retained control over the police, the army, and the foreign relations. He also retained the power to pass into law any legislation he felt necessary. And this was something that I believe Nkrumah was forced to put there because, Nkrumah would not do something like this. But I'm sure he was forced to put this one there. You see, at this time, the country, the Gold Coast, was not a republic yet. And so the British, in a way, still had some sort of authority over us. And so they made this possible so that the British could still exercise some sort of control, especially on these important aspects. These are security issues. The police, the army, and the foreign relations. If they allow Nkrumah to take charge of this army and foreign, they fear, they don't know what Nkrumah would be. And don't also forget that the British did not like Nkrumah, and that even explains why they did not include him on the 39-member committee for the Coussey Constitution in 1951. And so now that he is now in place, they fear, okay? So they still held on that power, and that becomes a shortcoming in any way. All the seats in the assembly had to be contested for by secret ballot. So everything was to be contested for. Now the cabinet, those who helped the ministers who were chosen by the prime minister, who helped the prime minister in his policies, were to be chosen from the assembly or the legislative assembly by the prime minister. All right, and he was responsible to the legislative assembly. So the cabinet were also to be chosen by the prime minister himself. So, really, that was what happened. Now, no seats were reserved for Europeans. No seats were reserved for Europeans in the legislative assembly. And this was also something that was in the right direction. You recall, now 6 Europeans were to represent mining, finance, defense, and other areas in the 1951 Constitution. Now, what were these people doing in the Legislative Assembly of Ghanaians? If truly that you want to give us independence, then what do you need? What do you want in our Legislative Assembly or in our assembly? And so Nkrumah had to take these people out. And this was total radical. It was a radical measure. It was so radical because for you to just decide to do away with these Europeans once and for all in that manner, this is something that the UGCC members could not do. And so they had to accept the 1951 Constitution, even though that was unconstitutional or was against the principles of governance. That did not actually give Ghanaians true freedom. But they accepted it. And this was the difference between Kwame Nkrumah and the members of the UGCC. Nkrumah kicked all the chiefs because really, if you want to go democratic way, chiefs are not, we don't appoint, it's not because they are chiefs, but we don't appoint. Democracy does not appoint people to represent people. That is what we all agree and that is what we all accept. So Nkrumah did nothing wrong in bringing out a new constitution. Rather, the 1951 constitution, to me, which I side with Nkrumah, was not the best, and it was not the best for democratic principles. So taking away the Europeans was certainly not anything, different or kind of strange, just that it was radical. But hey, who cares about that? They don't care about that. So why should we care about them? So again, let's look at the strength. So now we have looked at the features of the 1954 Kwame Nkrumah Constitution, which to me was okay. Just that a little hinges here and there. We will look at the shortcomings, but to me it was okay as compared to the 1951 Constitution. So let's look at the strength. What were the strengths in this Constitution? So it paved the way for internal self-rule. So the country internally, because both the Legislative Assembly and the Executive Council were all Ghanaians. So internally, we could formulate our own policies, discuss our own issues without any foreign influence in there. And so the Ghanaians took their destiny in their own hands, except that the Queen who was represented by the governor, who still held veto powers when it comes to external affairs, foreign relations, because we were not republic, and so the Queen was still our head. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah at this time was not a president until 1960, so we were still under colonial rule, but not in that sense. So yeah, that was what happened. Now, for the first time, the Chief Justice was to be appointed by the governor upon the advice from the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister Nkrumah would also advise the Chief Justice. Now, all these were not in the 1951 Constitution. Again, the independence of the judiciary was preserved under the Constitution. In effect, there was a Judicial Service Commission that was appointed. And this commission was to advise the Prime Minister on the appointments of judges, except the Chief Justice. So the Judicial Service was also commissioned. Of course, the Judicial Service Commission was also done, and they advised the Prime Minister on appointment of judges. Good. So these were some of the strength of the Constitution. Let's look at the shortcomings, which I have talked about some of them. The shortcomings of this Constitution, some of the weaknesses, things which still needs to be done or still needs to be improved. The governor, though had its power considerably reduced, he still possesses the reserve powers, all right, which he can veto bills into law that the Legislative Assembly had rejected if they deemed it inappropriate for the governance of the country. So the governor or the Queen, the Queen, who was represented by the governor, still had that power to veto bills. And so still, really, it wasn't all that, based on democratic principle. But then, that was not in the right way, because through democracy, if the people decide, the president cannot veto or should not veto. That is not democracy. You understand? Democracy is supposed to be governance for the people, by the people, and of the people. And so, if the governor could veto, then that could not be, of course, considered as a true one. So that was a shortcoming or a weakness. Now, again, the governor still exercised greater control of the key ministries: foreign, defense, and treasury, and finance. So, in as much as we could have all Ghanaian members on the Legislative Assembly, as well as the executive councils, our treasury, our finances were still controlled by the British. And so that, again, we are saying was also against democratic principles. So, hey, these are some of the shortcomings of the 1954 Constitution. Good. So I hope you have been educated. We have done the features of the Kwame Nkrumah Constitution. We've also looked at the strength, and then we've also looked at the shortcomings of that Constitution. Good. So let's try our hand on this work. This is an object question. Examine 4 main features of the 1954 Constitution. So 4 features of them, you talk about them. 2011, this is also a WASI 2012. Any 3 constitution introduced into the country between 1900 and 1960. And I've mentioned almost all of them. Have a nice day.
TV, first among equals. Bye.